Göbekli Tepe itself was the end of a process, not the beginning of a process. It was something that marked, it was a marker. It was something that brought together the best of everything that they'd accumulated and created it in one place and left it there, finally at the end, burying it.
Imagine a place older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older than anything we thought we knew about human history. A place built by hands we cannot name, leaving no cities, no records, only enormous stones carved with serpents, vultures, and headless human figures. What kind of people could have created something this sophisticated so long ago? For decades, archaeologists called it a temple. They were wrong. In early 2025, something emerged from the Turkish soil that shattered every assumption. Could this discovery rewrite everything we thought we knew about the dawn of civilization? This is Göbekli Tepe, and what we've just uncovered changes everything. The hill with a secret. In the windswept highlands of southeastern Turkey, about 10 kilometers from the Syrian border, there is a hill. The locals call it Göbekli Tepe, which translates simply to Potbelly Hill.
11,500 years ago by hunter-gatherers. That's 6,000 years earlier than Stonehenge. And yet somehow our ancestors were capable of making this.
For thousands of years, farmers walked past it. Sheep grazed on its slopes, and nobody paid it much attention. It was just another mound in a landscape full of mounds. But in 1963, a joint survey by Istanbul University and the University of Chicago noticed something unusual. There were fragments of worked limestone scattered across the surface, too many to be natural, too deliberately shaped to be accidental. The survey team noted the anomaly in their reports and moved on. The hill kept its secrets for another 30 years. Everything changed in 1994 when German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt visited the site. Schmidt had spent years studying the transition from hunter-gatherer societies to farming communities, and something about this hill caught his attention. Where others saw rubble, Schmidt saw patterns. He began to dig, and what emerged from the earth over the following years defied everything archaeologists thought they knew about prehistoric humans. The first thing his team uncovered were massive T-shaped pillars, some standing nearly 6 meters tall and weighing up to 10 tons.
What he discovered was mind-blowing. After discovering the first T-shaped pillar buried at the site, he soon found more of these massive structures.
During the intensive dig, Schmidt and his team,
they were arranged in precise circles, not randomly scattered, but deliberately positioned with geometric accuracy. And they were covered, every surface, with intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with meaning. Foxes with narrow, knowing eyes, snakes coiled in tense spirals, vultures spreading their wings over scenes that looked almost ceremonial, scorpions poised to strike, and among these animals, unsettling human-like forms with no faces watching silently across 11,000 years. Let that number sink in. 11,000 years. When these pillars were carved and raised, the last ice age had barely ended. Humans had not yet invented the wheel. They had not discovered how to smelt metal. They had no writing, no pottery, no permanent settlements that we knew of. And yet here was evidence of planning, coordination, artistic sophistication, and engineering skill that should not have existed for another 6 millennia. The standard model of human progress, the neat progression from primitive nomads to sophisticated civilizations, suddenly had a problem. Göbekli Tepe did not fit. The impossible temple. For years, the mainstream interpretation of Göbekli Tepe was straightforward, if slightly uncomfortable. Archaeologists called it the world's first temple, a sacred gathering place where nomadic hunter-gatherers from surrounding regions would periodically converge to perform rituals, celebrate seasonal events, perhaps bury their dead with ceremony. The evidence seemed to support this. There were no houses, no fire pits for daily cooking, no accumulated trash deposits that would indicate people lived here permanently. It appeared to be a place people visited, not a place they stayed. But this explanation raised uncomfortable questions. How did Stone Age nomads, people who supposedly spent their days tracking game and foraging for berries, find the time and resources to quarry limestone blocks weighing 10 tons?
Kind of story that happens at a lot of sites. We find this obviously with the unfinished obelisk at Aswan in Egypt, which is the largest obelisk ever made. We find this at Baalbek, which is the largest stones ever quarried, were actually left in the quarry.
Carve them with precision and transport them to hilltops. How did they coordinate the labor of hundreds or possibly thousands of workers without any central authority, without any system of writing to keep records, without the surplus food that agriculture provides? The logistics alone would challenge a modern construction company with trucks and cranes. These people had stone tools and human muscle. Klaus Schmidt proposed a radical idea that turned conventional thinking upside down. What if we had the sequence backward? The traditional model assumed that agriculture came first, that farming created surplus food. Surplus food allowed specialization. Specialization enabled complex societies, and complex societies built monuments. But Schmidt suggested that Göbekli Tepe might have come before agriculture, that the desire to gather, to worship, to create these sacred spaces might have been what drove humans toward farming in the first place. Religion did not emerge from civilization. Civilization emerged from religion. It was a compelling theory, but it remained just that, a theory. The evidence was ambiguous. The site was only 10% excavated, with 90% still buried under layers of soil. And then there was the strangest detail of all, the one that kept researchers awake at night wondering what they were really dealing with. Around 8000 BCE, roughly 2,000 years after its construction, the people of Göbekli Tepe deliberately buried the entire site. They did not abandon it gradually, letting nature reclaim the stones over centuries. They actively, intentionally, covered it with debris and dirt, hiding it from the world. And then, they walked away. Why would anyone bury something they had worked so hard to build? What were they hiding or protecting? What the stones tell us. The stones at Göbekli Tepe are not silent. They are screaming across 11,000 years, desperate to be understood. Every surface carries meaning. Every carving tells a fragment of a story we are only beginning to piece together. These were not decorations added to fill empty space. They were messages, carefully composed and painstakingly executed by people who had something urgent to say, but no written language to say it. So they spoke in images, and those images have waited millennia for someone to listen. Start with the pillars themselves. Those massive T-shaped monoliths are not abstract architectural elements. Look closer and you will see arms carved along their sides, bending at the elbows, hands reaching toward what would be a belly. Some wear carved belts or loincloths around their midsections. These are not pillars in the ordinary sense. They are stylized human figures, giants frozen in stone, standing watch over the enclosures they inhabit. Whether they represent ancestors, gods, spirits, or something else entirely remains debated, but their humanity is unmistakable. The people who built this site wanted to be surrounded by presences, by beings that looked back at them even when carved from limestone. Then there are the animals. Foxes with narrow, knowing eyes prowl across the stone surfaces. Snakes coil in tight spirals, their scales rendered with surprising precision. Wild boars charge eternally forward, tusks lowered. Vultures spread their wings in poses that feel almost ceremonial. Scorpions crouch with stingers raised, frozen in the moment before striking. Spiders, cranes, lions, aurochs, and creatures that defy easy identification crowd the pillars in what feels less like a zoo and more like a mythology rendered visible. These were not random animals chosen for decoration. Each one carried weight, significance, perhaps power. What makes the animal carvings even more intriguing is their distribution. Different enclosures seem to emphasize different creatures. One area is dominated by serpents, their bodies winding across multiple pillars in interconnected patterns. Another features foxes prominently, their eyes following visitors from every angle. A third highlights wild boars with an intensity that suggests special importance. Some researchers believe these distinctions represent clan markers or tribal identities. Imagine different groups traveling from across the region to gather at this sacred hilltop, each bringing their own totemic animal, their own symbolic identity. The enclosures may have served as meeting spaces for specific tribes, sacred rooms where the fox people or the serpent people conducted their particular rituals. Göbekli Tepe was not one community, but many, united by shared sacred ground but maintaining distinct identities carved permanently into stone. The most analyzed and debated carving sites on Pillar 43, which researchers have nicknamed the vulture stone. It is a complex scene that has generated dozens of competing interpretations, none fully satisfying, all fascinating. At the center, a vulture spreads its wings wide, and beneath one wing rests what appears to be a circular object, perhaps a sun, perhaps something else, entirely. Below the vulture lies a headless human figure, its body rendered with unsettling clarity despite the missing head. A scorpion crouches nearby. Other symbols scatter across the surface, some recognizable, others mysterious. What does it mean? One interpretation connects the scene to death rituals. Many ancient cultures practiced excarnation, leaving the dead exposed for vultures and other scavengers to consume the flesh before collecting the bones for burial. The headless figure might represent this process, a soul released from its body, carried skyward by the vulture. Others see astronomical alignments in the arrangement, arguing that the figures correspond to constellations visible in the night sky 11,000 years ago. The circular object becomes the sun, the scorpion becomes Scorpius, and the entire panel transforms into a star map carved by people with no telescopes but endless patience for watching the heavens. A more dramatic theory suggests the vulture stone records a catastrophic event, perhaps a comet impact or cosmic disaster that traumatized the population so deeply they felt compelled to immortalize it as a warning for future generations. The date encoded in the astronomical positions, according to this interpretation, corresponds to the Younger Dryas period, a sudden return to Ice Age conditions that devastated ecosystems across the Northern Hemisphere. We may never know which interpretation, if any, captures the truth. But the debate itself reveals something important. These carvings are not primitive scratches made by simple minds. They are sophisticated compositions that reward careful study, that contain layers of meaning we are still excavating. The people who created them understood symbolism, narrative, and the power of images to communicate across time. They were thinking about death, about the sky, about their place in a world they did not fully control, but desperately wanted to understand. 11,000 years before the first written word, they found a way to speak to us. And here is what strikes deepest when you truly contemplate these carvings. The hands that made them belonged to people fundamentally like us. They wondered what happened after death. They watched the stars and looked for patterns. They needed to belong to groups and mark that belonging with symbols. They feared predators and respected the power of animals they could not fully dominate. They wanted to leave something behind, something that would outlast their brief lives and testify that they existed, that they mattered, that they had something worth saying. The stones at Göbekli Tepe are not relics of an alien past. They are family letters, written by ancestors who knew we would someday come looking for them. The conversation they started 11,000 years ago is still waiting for us to continue it. Every new excavation, every fresh analysis, every theory debated and refined brings us closer to understanding what they were trying to tell us. The stones have been patient, they can wait a little longer. But maybe, after all this time, we finally have the tools and the humility to truly listen. The 2025 Revelation. Now we arrive at what brought you here, the discoveries that emerged in early 2025 and sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. For decades, the consensus held that Göbekli Tepe was a ceremonial site only, a place of rituals and gatherings, but not habitation. People visited, they worshipped, and they left. But as excavations expanded beyond the original enclosures, the ground began telling a different story. Along the edges of the exposed areas, archaeologists uncovered features that had never been found at the site before. Well-defined hearths blackened by ancient fires, the kind of fires you build for warmth and cooking, not ceremony. Deep storage pits dug with clear purpose, designed to hold food reserves. Foundation trenches marking planned structures that looked unmistakably like the outlines of buildings meant for living. Broad, smooth work surfaces that resembled preparation areas, places where daily tasks were performed, food was processed, and tools were made. People lived here, not just visited, not just gathered for festivals and dispersed. They stayed. They cooked. They stored surplus food. They made their homes in the shadow of these massive pillars. The temple theory was not wrong exactly, but it was incomplete. Göbekli Tepe was not either a temple or a settlement. It was both. It was something we had never seen before, a hybrid site where the sacred and the domestic intertwined in ways that challenged every category archaeologists had developed over centuries of study. But the surprises kept coming. Alongside these living spaces, excavators found tools, stone blades, scrapers, and grinding stones, along with remains of plants and animals, wheat grasses and legumes, gazelle bones and bird feathers. The grinding stones were particularly significant because they pointed to food processing, the kind of sustained effort that supports longer stays. This was not temporary camping. This was proto-settlement, the embryonic stage of village life emerging 11,000 years ago in a location previously thought to be purely religious. And then came the radar scans. Ground-penetrating radar had been used at Göbekli Tepe before, but the 2025 surveys expanded into previously unexplored areas. What they revealed was staggering. At least 15 more buried enclosures, many virtually untouched, some potentially older than anything yet excavated. The implications were enormous. If the oldest structures date back 15,000 years, as some readings suggest, we are looking at monuments built during the depths of the last ice age, when much of Europe was still covered in glaciers and humans were supposed to be living in caves. The scale expanded as well. Researchers identified over 200 additional standing stones in the broader area, purpose-built monuments arranged in circular and oval patterns similar to the original enclosures. 15 new megalithic temple sites have been confirmed in the surrounding region. Göbekli Tepe, it turns out, was not an isolated anomaly. It was the center of something larger, a network of sacred sites spread across the landscape, built by a culture far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. Rewriting the human story. So what does all of this actually mean? Why should a pile of carved stones buried in Turkish soil 11,000 years ago matter to you, sitting here in the 21st century with a smartphone in your pocket and satellites orbiting overhead? Because Göbekli Tepe is not just an archaeological curiosity, it is a mirror. And when we look into it, we see something unsettling about the story we have been telling ourselves for centuries. The traditional narrative of human progress is neat, linear, and comfortable. First came fire, giving us warmth and cooked food. Then came better tools, carved from stone and eventually bronze and iron. Language emerged, allowing us to coordinate and share knowledge. Agriculture followed, rooting us to the land and creating surplus. That surplus enabled cities, and cities gave rise to writing, laws, religion, and everything we call civilization. Each step built logically on the last, a steady climb from primitive to sophisticated, from caves to skyscrapers. It is a satisfying story. It makes sense, and Göbekli Tepe suggests it might be fundamentally wrong. The problem is sequence. The traditional model assumes agriculture came first. Farming created food surplus. Surplus freed people from constant foraging. Free time allowed specialization, and specialized labor enabled monument building. You need full stomachs before you can afford to stack giant stones. Except here is Göbekli Tepe, built before widespread agriculture, before pottery, before metal tools, before any of the prerequisites we assumed were necessary. Hunter-gatherers who should have been spending every waking moment tracking game and collecting berries somehow found the time, resources, and organizational capacity to quarry 10-ton limestone blocks, carve them with artistic precision, and arrange them in geometric circles aligned with the heavens. The timeline does not work. Something is missing from our model. Klaus Schmidt proposed a radical inversion that still sends ripples through archaeology today.
It's a project in southeastern Turkey at a site called Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe means mound with belly, or mound with belly. It's just his name, an old name from the map.
What if the temple came before the farm? What if the desire to gather, to worship, to create sacred spaces together was so powerful that it actually drove the development of agriculture? Think about the logistics. If hundreds or thousands of people from scattered nomadic bands periodically converged on this hilltop for rituals and ceremonies, they would face an immediate problem. How do you feed everyone? Hunting and foraging work for small mobile groups, but they cannot reliably sustain large stationary gatherings. The pressure to develop more dependable food sources would have been immense. In this view, religion did not emerge from civilization. Civilization emerged from religion. We did not build temples because we had full bellies. We learned to fill our bellies because we desperately wanted to build temples. The 2025 discoveries strengthen this interpretation dramatically. The evidence of permanent habitation, the hearths and storage pits and grinding stones, suggests that people were already transitioning toward settled life at Göbekli Tepe itself, not in some distant farming village, but right here, in the shadow of the sacred pillars. The site was not just a destination for occasional pilgrimage. It was becoming a community, perhaps one of the first true communities in human history, where the sacred and the domestic intertwined so completely that separating them makes no sense. These people were not choosing between survival and meaning. They were discovering that meaning was essential to survival. This reframes everything we think we know about human nature. We like to imagine ourselves as fundamentally rational creatures, practical problem solvers who secure food, water, and shelter before turning to luxuries like art and spirituality. But Göbekli Tepe suggests something different. We are, at our core, meaning-seeking beings. The need for stories, symbols, shared rituals, and sacred spaces is not a byproduct of civilization, but a driving force behind it. Our ancestors did not wait until survival was guaranteed before asking the big questions about life, death, and the cosmos. They asked those questions first, and they restructured their entire existence to pursue the answers. The spiritual impulse was not a luxury. It was woven into the very fabric of becoming human. 11,000 years ago, people who lacked metal, writing, and the wheel looked up at the stars, looked around at each other, and decided that some things were worth more than survival alone. They carved their beliefs into stone and raised those stones toward the sky, and in doing so, they began building the world we inherited. Every city you have ever walked through, every institution that shapes your life, every question you have ever asked about purpose and meaning, all of it traces back in some way to that first impulse to gather and create something lasting together. Göbekli Tepe does not just add a chapter to human history, it rewrites the introduction.
Of a gigantic civilization.
Test results have supported the idea that Göbekli Tepe is nearly 12,000 years old, almost 7,000 years older than Mesopotamia's Fertile Crescent.
And we are only beginning to understand what that means for the story we tell about ourselves. Echoes across the world. Göbekli Tepe stands as a marker, the oldest known monumental site, but it does not stand alone. When you survey the ancient world, a pattern emerges that raises fascinating questions about human nature and cultural transmission. Consider Stonehenge, rising from the English plains around 3000 BCE.
The world's most mysterious sights. A circle of towering stones, whispering of ancient societies and arcane rites. Known as Stonehenge.
A full 6,000 years after Göbekli Tepe. The design principles are strikingly similar. Massive stones, arranged in circles, aligned with celestial events, serving as gathering places for communities spread across wide territories. The builders of Stonehenge knew nothing of Göbekli Tepe, buried and forgotten by their time, yet they reached for the same solutions, the same forms, as if something in the human mind naturally gravitates toward circles of standing stones when trying to connect with forces beyond the everyday. The temples of Malta, particularly Gantija, date to around 3600 BCE and rank among the oldest freestanding structures in the world. Built without metal tools, they required the same kind of coordinated labor and engineering knowledge that Göbekli Tepe demanded. On the island of Menorca, the Taula monuments present T-shaped stones that echo the pillars of Turkey, though they were built thousands of years later and thousands of miles away. Across the Pacific, the Moai of Easter Island demonstrate that isolated cultures with no contact with Europe or the Near East independently developed the same drive to carve massive stone figures and move them across the landscape through sheer human effort. What does this pattern tell us? Perhaps that the impulse to build lasting monuments, to mark sacred spaces with stone, to create gathering places that connect communities to the sky and to their ancestors, is not a cultural quirk, but a species-wide trait. Separated by oceans and millennia, humans keep inventing the same answers to the same deep questions. Göbekli Tepe may be the earliest voice in this conversation, but it is far from the only one. The questions that remain. Despite the breakthroughs of 2025, Göbekli Tepe keeps most of its secrets. Only about 10% of the site has been excavated. At current rates, full exploration could take more than a century. Every new layer of soil removed has the potential to overturn what came before. The intentional burial remains unexplained. Why would people who spent generations building these circles, carving these pillars, and maintaining these sacred spaces suddenly decide to bury everything? Were they fleeing some catastrophe? Were they performing a final ritual, putting the site to rest the way you might bury a body? Were they hiding something from enemies, or from future generations who might misuse what they had created? We do not know. The Earth has not yet given up that answer. We still do not fully understand who these people were. No human remains have been found at the site itself. We have their art, their architecture, and now evidence of their daily lives, but we do not have their bones, their DNA, or anything that would tell us directly what they looked like or where their descendants went. They are present only through what they left behind, like shadows cast on stone. And there is a deeper question that the site forces us to confront. If hunter-gatherers 11,000 years ago could achieve this level of sophistication, what else might be buried under the soil of the ancient Near East, or under the jungles of the Amazon, or beneath the sand of the Sahara? Göbekli Tepe was discovered almost by accident, dismissed for decades as an unimportant hill. How many other potbelly hills are out there, waiting for someone to start digging? 11,000 years ago, hands we will never know carved stone with symbols meant to outlast their own lives. They built something meant to endure, something that challenges everything we thought we knew about ourselves. And now, we are the ones reading their messages, but the story is far from over. Göbekli Tepe is not just a site frozen in time. It is a question etched in rock, daring us to uncover what came before, what we have yet to imagine, and what truths about human history are still hidden beneath the soil. How many other worlds, other civilizations were there before us? And what happened to them? The stones have waited 11,000 years for us to ask the right questions. Can we be ready for the answers? And as we dig deeper, one question becomes clear. What other secrets are lying beneath our feet, silently shaping the story of humanity? Every stone, every carving, may hold the key to a past we have barely begun to understand.